Unit 731. The history of Unit 731 is one of the darkest pages of World War II, one that Japan tried to keep silent about for a long time. In the late 1930s, Japan occupied part of China, and it was there, in Harbin, that a secret laboratory appeared. Officially it was called the Center for Preventive Medicine and Water Supply. Sounds almost harmless, doesn't it? But in reality, it was a true death factory. Here, Japanese military doctors conducted monstrous experiments on humans. The test subjects were called logs, so as not even to use the word human. People were infected with plague, anthrax, cholera, and then observed as the diseases destroyed the body. All this was done without the slightest attempt at treatment. The sole purpose was to understand how effective biological weapons could be. The most terrifying facts are connected with the fact that many experiments were carried out without anesthesia. People were operated on alive, tested to see how long a person could survive with transplanted organs or without parts of their body. In winter, experiments with freezing were conducted. A person was taken out into the frost and doused with water until the limbs turned into blocks of ice. Then they were thawed to see what would happen. According to some estimates, the victims of Unit 731 numbered from 3,000 to 10,000 people. But if we take into account the epidemics that the Japanese deliberately spread in China, the count runs into the hundreds of thousands. After the war, many scientists from Unit 731 escaped punishment. The United States secretly granted them amnesty in exchange for the data obtained. Thus, terrible science became a bargaining chip. Project MKUltra. Now let's move to the United States during the Cold War. Here began another story that sounds like the script of a science fiction movie. But it is reality. This is about Project MKUltra, a CIA program that officially existed from the early 1950s to the 1970s. The main goal was control over the human mind. The CIA wanted to create methods by which they could break a personality, implant new attitudes, erase memories, or instill necessary thoughts. To achieve this, they used LSD, hypnosis, electroshock, and even sensory deprivation. People were subjected to experiments without their knowledge. Sometimes they were prisoners, sometimes psychiatric patients, and sometimes ordinary citizens who did not even suspect they had become part of a secret experiment. There are well-known cases when people were secretly given LSD in drinks, and then observed for their behavior. The most infamous episode is connected with Dr. Frank Olson. He was a CIA employee who was secretly given LSD. A few days later, Olson fell from a hotel window under mysterious circumstances. Officially it was called a suicide, but many believe he was eliminated because he knew too much. MKUltra remained secret for a long time. Only in the 1970s did the US Congress begin an investigation, and some documents were declassified. What became known already shocked the world, but most of the archives had been destroyed in advance. To this day, no one knows the full scale of these experiments. Nazi experiments. When speaking of monstrous experiments, we cannot fail to mention Nazi Germany. In death camps such as Auschwitz, Dachau, or Sachsenhausen, experiments were carried out that are impossible to read about without horror. The most infamous was Dr. Josef Mengele, nicknamed the Angel of Death. His particular interest was in twins. He would separate them into groups, infect one with a disease to see how it would affect the other. He performed blood transfusions between twins and conducted operations without anesthesia. In addition, the camp studied the effects of cold. People were placed in icy water or in frost and measured how long they could endure. They tested how the body reacts to pressure drops. Prisoners were placed in special pressure chambers simulating altitudes of 12 to 15,000 meters. Many died right during the experiments. The Nazis also worked on the development of medicines and new methods of treating wounds. To do this, prisoners were infected with infections or given burns. And then various substances were tested. All this was presented as medicine, but in essence it was sadism disguised as science. After the war, some Nazi doctors were brought to trial in Nuremberg. However, as in the case of Japan's Unit 731, some of the data from there, research, was later used in military medicine. This is one of the darkest pages of 20th century science. USSR biolaboratories. Now let's move to the Soviet Union. The USSR also had secret laboratories engaged in the development of biological weapons. One of the most famous was the base in Tikhino near Moscow. Officially, it was the Scientific Research Institute of Plant Protection. In reality, a center where work was carried out on viruses and bacteria that could be used for military purposes. Soviet scientists created strains of smallpox, plague, anthrax that were more resistant and deadly than usual. In closed sources, there are mentions that there were even programs to create so-called combat viruses, hybrid forms against which there was no treatment. In 1979, a disaster occurred in Sverdlovsk, now Ekaterinburg. Spores of anthrax leaked from a secret laboratory. Officially, the authorities denied the very fact of the accident for a long time, but according to unofficial data, several dozen people died. Many believe that this was the largest case of a biological disaster in the USSR. To this day, it is unknown how far Soviet developments went. After the collapse of the Union, part of the archives disappeared, and many scientists emigrated. But rumors about the biological legacy of the USSR continue to stir minds. Project Acoustic Kitty. If the previous stories sounded like horrors, this one is more like a black comedy. In the 1960s, the CIA really tried to turn cats into spies. The project was called Acoustic Kitty. The idea seemed brilliant. Cats can calmly approach people without arousing suspicion. Therefore, by implanting a microphone, a battery, and an antenna into them, one could get the perfect agent for eavesdropping. And engineers actually began the operation. A microphone was implanted in the cat's ear, a transmitter under the skin, and an antenna in the tail. After long training, the first spy was sent on a mission to eavesdrop on Soviet diplomats. The cat was released near the USSR embassy in Washington. But the experiment ended literally within minutes. The animal ran onto the road and was killed by a taxi. Despite such a failure, the project was developed for some time, but soon it was recognized as completely hopeless. And in the declassified documents, Acoustic Kitty looks like one of the most absurd examples of how far intelligence agencies are willing to go for espionage. The Stanford Prison Experiment. In 1971, American psychologist Philip Zimbardo decided to conduct an experiment that went down in history as one of the most scandalous in psychology. He wanted to find out how strongly a person is influenced by social roles. For this, a group of student volunteers was recruited and randomly divided into prisoners and guards. In the basement of Stanford University, a mock prison was set up. Everything was supposed to last 2 weeks. But the experiment got out of control within the first few days. The guards began to behave more and more cruelly. They shouted at the prisoners, forced them to perform humiliating commands, and then began to use physical force. The prisoners, in turn, began to show submission and depression. Some could not stand it and asked to stop participating. The experiment had to be stopped on the 6th day. Zimbardo later admitted that he did not expect such a rapid and radical change in people's behavior. This case became proof that even ordinary people, placed in certain conditions, are capable of turning into real executioners.